Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Pat.
And I'm Tom, and it's our life unit for the month of December. Merry Christmas to everybody. Christmas was a couple of days ago, and New Year's is coming up here pretty soon, so of course you should get ready to watch those fireworks.
Yep, always a good lot of fun. So today we're going to look at, New Year, we always say out with the old, in with the new, and so we're going to look at some old-fashioned language and why it should change. We're going to take a quick look at some kind of terms, some ways of speaking that we should really try and move away from. We'll talk about why we're doing that in the article. I'm trying to think of some other expressions and words that people don't really use these days. I think people in the UK are always thought to say things like, how do you do? I think that's a stereotypical greeting that people associate with the UK. But, of course, these days, no one probably under 70 would say it.
Yeah, I remember when I first came to Taiwan, I heard kids, when they came up to me, they go, how do you do? And I thought, well, that's correct. That does mean how are you, but we don't really use that anymore. As you said, it's something that people think British people say, but I guess according to you, you don't really use it anymore, do you?
No, you would maybe find people doing it in a kind of jokey way, just for a bit of fun, but no one would kind of seriously greet anybody like that. It's way too formal, it's way too old-fashioned. It's just not something that a modern person would just say without thinking about it.
Yep, and we're talking about old-fashioned language in terms of sexist language, referring to men and women when you could just use a term to include them all. That's kind of what we're trying to do, and we'll talk about what this is all about when we read our article. So let's get to it. Let's read the entire contents of our lesson now one time. When talking about other people in English, you will often find yourself speculating on their gender. In every case that you don't use someone's name, you have to decide on a pronoun. Do you use they, he, she? But in fact, it could be even more complicated. Many jobs terms used to differ slightly between the male and female versions. Just think about actor versus actress. While it seems minor, the language we use as individuals and as a society has far-reaching effects. There is a vicious cycle embedded in much of the gendered language of the past, and much of it is still in use today. Men's power in society has been reflected in the prestige and dominance of the word that applied to them. Take the word master as an example. Classically, it meant a man who was in charge and in control, whether of a ship, a business, or slaves, and it still means the same today. By applying the ending ESS to it, we get the word mistress. While in the past it held some measure of the meaning of master, sexism has led to the modern usage that instead indicates a low status. A mistress today is a woman who is not considered her sexual partner's equal, as a wife would be. Instead, she is secret, shameful, and defined solely in relation to the man she is sleeping with. Mistress is not the only example of this pattern. We can also see it in the word spinster, which describes an unmarried woman who is undesirable due to her age. The word is negative, but its counterpart, bachelor, has shades of desirability and fun. Fortunately, both words are used less and less. Examining our language for old, harmful ideas about sex and gender is an important way to make sure our words express what we actually want to say.
So our article is all about, we'd call it gendered language. We'll look at this word again, but it's basically using language to indicate whether something is male or female. A lot of languages around the world do this in different ways with different endings, different pronouns. French has got all kinds of genders in it, makes it very difficult to learn because it applies to the verbs and all sorts as well. But we're talking about English here, and that's why we start by saying, when talking about other people in English, you will often find yourself speculating on their gender. So speculating means guessing, kind of using the evidence you have to make a guess about the answer to something. And in this case, speculating on their gender doesn't mean trying to guess, are they man or woman? Are they bisexual? Are they something else? Are they kind of gender fluid, which is a term we use to mean people who don't identify as either man or woman, but just sometimes you're using a word and you're like, I'm not sure whether we're talking about a male or female. That's why we're speculating on their gender.
Right, so that's from the verb to speculate, and yeah, you're kind of trying to guess about something. So indeed, if you meet somebody and you ask their profession, gee, are you an actor or an actress? Should I call you an actor? Should I call you an actress? Or a manager or a manageress or whatever. There are different terms for that. So that's probably what this is referring to here. You're speculating on their gender. And in every case that you don't use someone's name, you have to decide on a pronoun. Okay, so of course we've got the pronouns in English that stand for other nouns, it, he, she, etc. So yes, if you meet somebody, is this person a he? Are they a she? Or do you use they, etc.? But in fact, it could be even more complicated. So yes, we've got these words, but it can be quite complicated because you need to know a lot more information before you make that determination. If something's complicated, it's just simply not simple. So I remember in the past I had a motorcycle that had some problems, and the guy at the shop, opened up the engine and looked in and thought, it's quite complicated. It's going to take me several days to repair your motorcycle there.
Exactly. It's a difficult business. Basically what the sentences are saying here is, when we're talking about somebody who isn't there, what is the correct word if we're not going to use their name all the time? Because we could say, oh, I haven't seen Richard today. Richard is not at work today. Has anybody seen Richard? But instead of using his name all the time, we want to use a pronoun. But what is the correct pronoun if we're using about maybe a person we don't know? If you've got somebody coming in for a job interview, we go, okay, will you see him? Will you see her? Will you say them? Because them is a gender neutral term to just mean whoever this person is. However, them is also plural, so it could be confusing. Them? What do you mean, meet them? How many people are we interviewing? So that's what this whole introduction means, that using different pronouns can actually be more complicated than you might realize, because they, them could mean one person or more than one person. And it gets more difficult as we start to think about the words for careers, and that's what we get into next. Many jobs terms used to differ slightly between the male and female versions. Just think about actor versus actress. So differ here is a verb, and it's to show that two things are different. You might say British English differs from American English. The way I speak, the pronunciation, sometimes the stress I use on different words and vowels differs from the way Tom would speak about it, just because that's our upbringing, that's our accent.
Yep, or the Mandarin spoken in China differs from the Mandarin spoken here in Taiwan. They have differences, basically. And yes, Pat brought up the example of British English and American English. They differ in various ways. And this also applies to job titles. They differ slightly between the male and female versions. Not always, but sometimes, like a doctor, that means both a male and a female doctor. But then there are other words like actor and actress. There are different words for that, and you need to choose which word to actually use. I think there's some other ones too. I hope we can come up with some more examples as our lesson continues, but indeed, that's the next example here. Just think about actor versus actress. Okay, so versus does mean when you're comparing things, especially you use this word when you're talking about a competition. Today, it's going to be New York versus Boston.
Exactly. So this may seem minor. Actor, actress, is it really that important? You might think, well, so what? Isn't it obvious? But as the article says, while it seems minor, the language we use as individuals and as a society has far-reaching effects. So this isn't just about picking the most appropriate noun. The nouns have meaning. There's a lot of history behind the words we choose, and they have far-reaching effects. Far-reaching means it doesn't just affect things close to you, it kind of affects the future. It's got consequences to it that maybe we don't quite see yet because they're far away. And all this language is about basically being inclusive and allowing men and women to be equal. That's the goal, but in the past this wasn't the case, which is what we get into in our next paragraph.
Indeed, they do have far-reaching effects. I think I've read about surveys where women don't do as well with mathematics tests because basically they're told they can't because they're women and stuff like that, and therefore it affects them psychologically. And indeed, they don't perform as well just because of that, and that does have to do with language. That's another example. So let's move on now to the next paragraph. It says, there is a vicious cycle embedded in much of the gendered language of the past, and much of it is still in use today. So if we talk about a vicious cycle, we talk about a series of events that affect what happens in the future, and then they just kind of go in this circle and nobody can get out of it. So you might be in the vicious circle of poverty because you're poor, you can't make enough money to afford an apartment or a place to live or something like that, and therefore you can't get a job because they can't call you or something. So it's a vicious cycle. You'll just stay poor all your life.
Exactly. There's no way to escape. And it's embedded in the language we use. If something is embedded in it, it's a part of it. It's kind of stuck in it, and it's really difficult to pull it out. If you think of getting maybe something stabs you, you get glass in a cut, it might be embedded in that cut. It's deep inside, and it's hard to pull it out in a painless fashion. And it's in all this gendered language. Gendered language, as we mentioned, is this use of different endings: actor, actress, waiter, waitress, steward, stewardess. Used to be words for people on airplanes, that kind of thing. And it seems innocent enough, but it's kind of talking about power in society. And we're going to take a short break right now for our Chinese teacher, but when we get back from that, we'll really examine some examples of this kind of male power in the past.
大家好，我是派老师。今天讲解的是12月份 Unit14， 这是一篇篇章结构的练习题。文章介绍语言和性别平等的关系。英文当中有一些用词随着性平意识抬头，是大家使用上要特别小心的。好，我们先一起解题吧。在开始解题前，老师想跟大家强调，答题前先看一下4个选项，心中有一印象，可以用哪些句子让文章变得更完整。此外，篇章结构最重要的就是回填的句子要和前后文连贯，在文意概念上要承先启后。请大家谨记8字真言：前后连贯，文意通顺；前后连贯，文意通顺。带着这个原则来答题，老师相信任何难题都可以迎刃而解。好，我们现在一起解第一题。第一题前面提到，在英文当中谈论某个对象的时候，使用代名词要很小心，区分男性、女性，用 he 或用 she。而下一句则以 actor 和 actress 为例，说明很多职业称谓也是男女有别。由此可知，在英文里面，不止代名词有男女之别，而选项 D 以 in fact 来承接上述的主题，就是说英文代名词有分男有分女。那在这里呢，我们用 it 来代替前面所说的，说明呢，实际上还有比这个更复杂的。什么更复杂呢？就是职业的称谓。那这里文意连贯通顺，所以我们第一题就选 D。We're
going to take a short break now, but please stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue talking about old-fashioned language and why it should change in order to, promote the advancement of different genders in society. And where we left off, we were talking about this vicious cycle embedded in the gendered language of the past, and some of these terms are still in use today, and we'd like to gradually get rid of those sexist terms, and we're going to give you some examples today. Men's power in society has been reflected in the prestige and dominance of the word that applied to them. So here we've got the word reflect. That's just a reaction to something. Of course, light will be reflected in a mirror, or your image will be reflected in a mirror. So basically, the power you have in society is reflected in your prestige and dominance. And of course, that refers to the word that applies to you, the word that you're using to describe your position. And again, we've got the word prestige here. That just means kind of power, influence, and your power over other people.
Right, prestige is all about having a great amount of respect and admiration for the qualities of something or for their achievements of something. So what we're saying here is that because men have for thousands of years been the more powerful of the two traditional sexes, they've been the kings, the rulers, they've led the armies, they've done all the jobs until basically the 20th century while women stayed at home. That is being reflected, it's being shown in the language that we use. So to try and make it easy to understand, let's actually look at a concrete example. As the article says, take the word master as an example. We use this sentence to introduce an example we're going to explain. So classically, master, meant a man who was in charge and in control, whether of a ship or a business or slaves, and it still means the same today. We say someone is a master if they're really good at a particular art form. You could say someone is the master of the home, master of the business, master of the classroom. It means they're in charge, but it is a male word.
Right, so if you describe Rafael Nadal as a master tennis player, that sounds right. But if you use that same word to describe Serena Williams, well, yeah, you could, but it does sound a little funny because, again, the word master usually is used to describe a man. I guess I'd describe Serena Williams as an expert tennis player.
Exactly. Now, there is a female version of this word. The article says, by applying the ending ESS to it, we get the word mistress. And so mistress is supposed to be the idea of just the female version of master. However, mistress has another meaning in modern society, which is kind of a married man's other woman. Xiao san is the kind of common word that I've heard a lot in Taiwan, and when you talk about drama shows and stuff like that. There are a number of other not very nice ways to say that kind of thing, but that's as kind of what this word has come to mean, and we explain that. While in the past, mistress, held some measure of the meaning of master, sexism has led to the modern usage that instead indicates a low status. So yeah, they used to be talking about, oh, she's the mistress of this household, the mistress of the world, someone like Queen Cleopatra or something like that. It was a high status word. It just meant the same as master. It had that measure of meaning. But sexism, in other words, discriminating against usually women and kind of saying men are better, women are worse, that's what sexism is. It's led to this modern usage of the woman, this mistress. It just means kind of a man's other lover.
Right, so if you just hear the word mistress out of context, well, you'll probably think of it that way. Oh, that just refers to a young woman that a married man is seeing because he's bored with his wife or whatever, and he has enough money for it, and his wife isn't going to find out or something like that. So indeed, that's what the word mistress refers to today. But in the past, remember, it held some measure of the meaning of master, and because of sexism, it has this modern meaning. It has lower status. Oh, you're his mistress, you're nobody special. Now, a mistress today, again, is a woman who has not considered her sexual partner's equal as a wife would be. Again, we've already defined that. Instead, she is secret, shameful, and defined solely in relation to the man she is sleeping with. Again, basically, the word mistress nowadays has a negative connotation.
Yeah, if it was in a news report, some kind of gossip story, it'd be like, oh, she's his mistress. So she only exists because she's having an affair with this guy. You know, her story, her regular life is usually not such an interesting part of it. So she's put down into a low status. It's not, oh, she has taken the power and is seeing this man. It's no, he is, you know, he's got a mistress, his poor wife, that kind of thing. And mistress is not the only example of this pattern we see as we get into our next example in the next paragraph.
Right. We can also see it in the word spinster. Already that word sounds kind of old. It sounds like a word that my grandparents used in their generation. You don't hear it so much anymore, but we should probably tell you what spinster is. It describes an unmarried woman who is undesirable due to her age. So indeed, nowadays there are lots of women who choose not to get married. It's not so unusual anymore. But again, as I said, maybe in my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation, that was kind of unusual. If a woman wasn't married and did not have children, she was called a spinster, and that did have a negative connotation. She was considered undesirable because she was old.
Exactly. And so we say the word is negative, but its counterpart bachelor has shades of desirability and fun. So counterpart basically means something's equivalent. You know, we're talking about sort of opposites or, you know, the male and female versions of a word, or, you know, if two players on a, you know, on a basketball court, you've got an attacker and a defender. They are counterparts. In a battle, you might have attacking army, defending army. They are counterparts. So here the counterpart is bachelor, which is just means by itself an unmarried man. But as this sentence says, bachelor sounds kind of cool. Oh, he's a bachelor. He's fun. He's available. He goes out and parties all the time. That's the connotations, this kind of meaning that the word has. Whereas spinster sounds like an old woman who stays at home.
Yep, and it doesn't seem fair because, yeah, if a man is older and he's not married, there's nothing wrong with that, so he's called a bachelor. But if a woman is older and not married, she gets a bad word, she's called spinster. So, of course, now we're trying to change that. It seems like it has changed already. We don't really necessarily need to specifically refer to older women who are not married as spinsters or anything. They're just people who just, for some reason, just did not get married. They made that decision. That's perfectly fine. But hopefully that is the trend these days. But again, the word spinster is negative. And again, its counterpart, bachelor, seems to be positive, and it sounds kind of fun. Now, fortunately, both words are used less and less. So if something's good as opposed to being bad, we say fortunately. So I could say that, for example, we planned to go to the beach on Saturday, but it rained. Fortunately, we did something else that was more fun.
Exactly. We use this at the start of a sentence when we want to deliver some good news, something that's better in contrast to what we've come before. So the article continues, examining our language for old, harmful ideas about sex and gender is an important way to make sure our words express what we actually want to say. So this conclusion means, yeah, we need to think about how we use these words. Do they have a negative meaning? When really what we should be doing is trying to make everything equal. We should not have one word mean more powerful if it's male than the female equivalent, and so on. So as an educational point, as you're learning English and you find these words, do have a bit of a think about the right way to use them and what they might mean apart from what they seem to on the surface.
Exactly, and of course we've been talking about these specific words, but nowadays also we have the problem with pronouns, he, she, or they, and you may hear the word they being used in place of the word he more and more, like oh, I don't know, every dog has his day or something. Well, his doesn't necessarily have to refer to a male dog. It should refer to all genders of dogs. So maybe you'll start hearing every dog has their day, something like that.
Exactly. So that's the kind of thing we want to think about. So once again now, we're going to hand you over to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back to sign off.
接着请看第二题，前一个句子 There is a vicious cycle embedded in much of the gendered language of the past, and much of it is still in use today. 这句话的意思是说，过去许多性别化的语言中，牢牢嵌入着一种恶性循环，其中许多至今仍在使用，而后一句是 take the word 怎么样？好，那从前后句我们可以看出，这里的论述重点在于语言中有很多男女不平等的现象，甚至从以前延续到现在。Master 这个字就是例子。我们选择 A Men's power in society has been reflected 这个句子。为什么我们要选 A？ 因为句子当中含有关键字 men's power， 它呼应了空格后第二句的 a man who was in charge and in control， 说明男性在社会上掌控大权。它完全呢可以反映在男性的用字上，跟男性相关的用词上。此外，也符合空格前一句所说的恶性循环。接着第三题，请看前一句 By applying the ending ess to it, we get the word mistress. Master 这个字做了字尾变化，加上 ess， 我们就有 mistress 这个字。而后面的句子呢，说明的是现今 mistress 这个单字指的不是和男主人有平等地位的妻子，而是男性的秘密情妇。所以我们需要找一个句子可以反映出古今差异，还有女性情势以及女性歧视来作为前导。所以我们选 C. While in the past it held some measure of the meaning of master, sexism has led to the modern usage that instead indicates a low status. 意思就是说，虽然在过去它在某种程度上代表了 master 的含义，但性别歧视反而导致在现代用法当中指称比较低下的地位。最后第四题，承接前面那一段，前两句说到 mistress 并不是这种模式的唯一例子，我们可以在 spinster 这个字其实不太好，查字典的话可能会查到类似像老处女这样的说法。那我们也知道这样子的用字其实非常的不尊重女性。那这个词里面呢，我们一样呢可以看到相同的现象。这个单字描述的是因为年龄呢，所以受到一些社会上的人不尊重他们的讲法。就是 spinster 呢，一般是指未婚女性，那他们可能到了适婚年龄还没结婚，就会被贴上这样的标签。空格下一句则说，幸亏这两个字都越来越少用了。选项 B 以 the word 开头，呼应第四题前一句的单字 spinster， 说明这个单字是负面的，但它相对应的男性用词 bachelor 单身汉却有受青睐和乐趣的意涵。那符合前文所讨论英文性别用词当中男尊女卑的现象。选了这个以后呢，一样我们的前后文意相当的连贯通顺，所以第四题我们就选 B。 好的，谢谢大家，以上就是我们针对篇章结构所做的解题，谢谢大家。
Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. And have some discussions about this. Have some discussions about sexism in language, both in English and in your own native tongue. I'm sure you'll find some interesting comments to mention to your group discussions. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
And I'm Pat.
Goodbye.
Bye.